Can I bring in the climate finance into the changing the narrative? Because this is very important, because in the structures that we described earlier, there's a lot of false solutions and dangerous distractions that tend to reproduce the same structures, and therefore the narrative about those false solutions is important. So when it comes to climate finance, and as somebody who 5 years ago was completely outside of the climate space, and so I come in as an alien observing what's happening here and what the narrative is, and it was really a shock to me when I learned about how things are being discussed in the climate space. So when you look at the root cause of the problem, which is emissions, like since the Industrial Revolution, and you look at the concept of a carbon budget and which countries have been responsible for the cumulative emissions, you realize that there's countries that have exceeded their carbon budget and countries, especially the African continent, that only emitted 4% of global emissions. So the countries that exceeded their carbon budget owe a climate debt. And the concept of debt in economics and finance and law is very straightforward. So Jakob, if I owe you $100, I'm supposed to pay you $100, right? And we can sit down and negotiate a payment plan as friends and everything. But at the end of the day, I give you $100 and you don't have to give me anything. But instead, in the climate finance space, instead of me giving you $100, I give you $3 and I tell you exactly what to do with it on my conditions, right? And you have to follow my conditionalities. And then I feel bad for you because you clearly need more than that. So I'm going to lend you $7, right? With concessional loans, you know, noblesse oblige. And I tell you exactly what to do with it and get you into a debt trap. And then, of course, you need more than that because we're in a climate crisis. So more climate finance. So I'm going to give you $10, but you have to give me your forest to offset my emissions so I can continue the emissions. And you now have to protect the forest because it's carbon market territory. So you have to protect it from its own custodians, the native communities that have preserved the forest, right? So, and then I give you $20 to produce green hydrogen for me, not for you, right? And I invest another $20 in your green industrial zone to assemble stuff from me, not for you, right? And at the end of the day, Jakob is looking at me and saying, wait a minute, where's my $100? Why am I giving you my forest? Why are you taking my hydrogen? You see what I mean? So shifting the narrative, sometimes you just have to look at the whole thing and say, climate finance should be repackaged as a conversation, as a narrative, into what it should be, which is debt cancellation, not debt rescheduling. That's number one. In terms of getting out of the debt, to create the fiscal policy space that we need for scaling up renewables, transfer of technologies, life-saving technologies to unleash the potential that we've been talking about in terms of renewables, clean cooking, clean transportation, and it should be in the form of grants, not loans and economic entrapment. And it should be at scale. I mean, the scale of the problem versus the numbers that we're seeing in the COP negotiations, most of which is loans and, you know, carbon markets and, you know, if we're serious about the problem, we need radical solutions, not in the political sense. Radical as in going to the roots of the problem, that's what the term means literally. And if we don't have radical solutions that go to the roots, then we end up with superficial solutions that reproduce the status quo. So the narrative about what we're doing is extremely important because it tells us if we're going into distractions and perpetuation of the status quo, or if we're really aiming at the transformation that the urgency of the situation calls for.